Okay, so let's go through setting up Webpack. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a directory, um, a new project, and I'll go into it. So right now we just have this project that has nothing in it. And what I'm going to do is I want to install some modules that I'm going to need to have Webpack run. And again, just so you're aware of it, Webpack is a program that's going to be running in Node. It's going to be running on our machine, and what it's going to do is it's going to take a JavaScript file or several JavaScript files and pack them together. A lot of other things we can do with it. One of the things that we'll do with it is use ES6 and make sure that it converts it to ES5. And what we're going to do, what I want to do here is I want to start off by, I want to be able to install NPM modules, and I want to save them, and I want to be able to put some scripts in my package JSON file. So the first thing that I'm going to do is say npm init. And what it will do here, when I do this, it's going to ask me some questions. But if I want to bypass those questions and just get the default answer, I put this Y flag here. And then it'll automatically create this file. It's showing me the file that it ended up creating. So if I go over here and I see ls, I'll see the package.json. Now I don't have a git repo at this point. So if I was to do something and say git.status, it would say you don't have a git repo. But I could create a git repo pretty easily by doing git init. So you have npm init, you have git init. Now I've got a git repo. If I do git.status, it'll say you have a file, it's not committed, git.add, and I could either add this file independently, or I can say, hey, look, I want to add all these things that are in red, and I say git.add. And now if I say git.status, I'll see that it's green. So what happens with Git is that this is considered a staging area. And it says you're not quite committed yet. These are the changes that will be committed when you commit. And you can see it's giving you a note. If I wanted to sort of back out of this, I could do that. But let me go over here and commit it. I'll say first commit. And if I go over here and now I say git.status, it just says, hey, you're up to date. You're on the master branch. Not really going to talk about branching here, but you're up to date. So now I've got my Git repo set up, and we're going to end up needing Webpack. We'll start out with just Webpack, and I'll go over here and I'll say npm install Webpack. And I'll save it. And I've got Webpack installed. If I wanted to run Webpack right here from the command line, I could go in here. By the way, if I look over here now, I can see that I've got my node modules folder, because when I install Webpack, by default, it's storing it in this node modules folder. And if I go over here and I specify node modules, Webpack, and I can even use code completion here and do bin Webpack.js. If I just did that, I'm basically running this Webpack executable. And if I hit enter, right, I'll get an error message. Error message says, hey, look, I don't have enough information. There's no output file name that you ended up giving me here. And this is where we need to create our Webpack configuration file. So I'm going to go here and I'll specify touch Webpack config.js. And let me open up my editor of choice, which is Vim. And if I go over here, I could see my Webpack config, which is empty. At its most basic level, I could say module.exports, and the only thing that I need to specify is an entry point and an output. My entry, and this doesn't exist yet, is going to be /source index. My output has a little bit more of a configuration, path, and it's going to be dist, that's the directory where this is going to be, and we'll also specify that we have a file name of bundle. And if I go over here and I run this again, it'll find that file. And it'll run, but I'll get a different error message. And the error message that I'll get here is going to be that it can't find this file. Let me go in here, and I'll create my source folder. I'll create my index.js, and I'm just going to go over here and say console.log hello. And I'm going to run this one more time. And now you'll see I actually went green. And if I go back here, and I go up here, I'll see that I have my dist folder. And actually, I want this to be called bundle.js. So let me go in here, not just bundle. I'll run this again. Go up here. And I'm going to go over here and let me delete this. And if I look at bundle.js, I'll see down here at the bottom, it's got my console.log. So that's sort of the first setup for basic Webpack, not worrying about ES6 or that sort of thing. I'm not even putting in a server or anything at this point. If you look at the amount of code that you have here, you have this Webpack config, which, again, what it's doing here is that we are specifying for the configuration that we've got an entry point and we've got an output, and that's, at its most basic level, that's all that Webpack needs, and we really didn't end up touching anything else at this point. So the next thing that we'll end up doing is showing you how you can, what Webpack does, and how we can end up pulling in other files into Webpack to make our life a little bit easier, and then we'll actually go and create a web page with it. So what exactly are we going to end up using Webpack for? Well, Webpack is going to take our files and it's going to pack them for us so that one of the things that it's going to do is it's going to make our life a little bit easier with our JavaScript code. Some of the things that we'll find out in Node that we can do, we can't really do when we're writing code for the browser. So if I go back over here to my index file, let's say that I wanted to bring in some other object. So let's say I'm going to go over here and I'm going to say require. I'm going to say const foo equals require /foo. So there's two ways I could bring files in. Right now I'm not using ES6, so I'm going to use this require syntax. These are basically just two different ways that you could end up loading files. The other way is going to be import, which we'll end up converting this to. So if I end up doing that, one of the things that I can also do here is that I'm going to go back and I'm going to run Webpack, but I'm going to pass it this watch flag, which ends up watching my files. I guess one other thing you could do here is you could also do H to see all the things that you could do with Webpack. This is pretty common too. This tells me that I can watch my files, so either I can do this. Now, again, I'm getting an error message. The error message is that it can't find this foo file. But let me also show you that the shorthand for this is just 1 dash and W. And still I get the same error message. Let's go in here and create this file. So I'm going to go over here and I'll say foo.js. And if I go here, you can see that that ends up building, but there's really nothing in foo. So let's go in and put in foo. And again, initially we'll use regular ES5 syntax, which says that what we want to do is do module exports. And we're going to end up exporting something, but let's actually decide what we're going to export. I'm going to create this constructor function for foo. I'll go over here and I'll say when I create foo, I'll pass in a name. This dot name equals name. And we'll go over here and I'm going to export foo. And this will run again. And if I go back and I take a look at my bundle file, I'll see that this ended up pulling in this code over here. Again, this is actually ES6, so let's make it all ES5, and we'll make it all ES5 by going back here and we'll convert it eventually to ES6. Now if I was to go back, make that change, it'll rerun because it's being watched. And now this is just regular ES5, but again, Webpack is packing it up. Notice now that both this foo function and this variable for foo are in the same file. And if I was to go back here to my index, I could do something like foo, lowercase, equals new foo, and give it a name of bar. And if I was to go over here and console log foo, I should end up seeing that foo. Now, right now, we don't really have an easy way of testing this or seeing it work. So I'm going to create an HTML page to do that. I'm actually going to try to do this without even creating a server. I'm just going to open it up as a file in Chrome. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to add my index.html, put an HTML here, put a head here, because that's where our scripts are going to go. Here's a body tag. A basic structure of an HTML page. We're going to do a source here. And this is going to be /dist bundle.js. Let's see if that path works. So what I'm going to do is go over here. I'm going to say open dot. This will actually open up Finder for me. And let's see if this will allow me to just browse it. I'm going to click on this. I'll say open with Chrome. And if I do that, it's seeing that it's not finding this file. And let's see if I can fix that. Instead of, let's see if a / will work. If not, I'll actually set up a web server. So yeah, that seems to need that, or else it's looking for the full path of this file. Here I'm basically saying, hey, look, this is right at the start at the index, go to dist, and here's bundle. And now if I run this, I'll see that I can print out my foo with the name of bar. And just to make it a little bit more interesting before we add any ES6 stuff to this, we could go over here and let's pretend that we're going to pass in a configuration object with a name. So now we're passing in this. And if we go back to foo, we'll specify that this is a configuration object. What's a good name for a configuration object? Config. We'll say this .name equals config.name. Let's also just add a prototype to it. Prototype. And we'll specify, say hi. This is going to be a function. And we'll concatenate a string, and we'll say console.log. Hello, my name is this .name. And if this works and it ends up running, and you could always go back here and see that it's being watched, we could go and rerun this. And let's make sure that it's not being cached. Let me do a hard reload. Let's take a look. All right, that's right. It'll do the exact same thing. Sorry. To see that this is changing, let's go over here and we'll say console.log foo, say hi to us. Now we should see something different. And we want to not, this is it's interesting. This is just showing us the function. We want to call the function. And in fact, when we call the function, we don't have to do console.log because the function itself will do console.log. So here we will do this. And if we wanted to sort of just break this apart into something else, we could go over here and say, even have a second prototype, foo.prototype. And here we'll say, get message. So break this apart in 2 steps. What's our message going to be? I'm going to take this line here, and I'm going to return this And I'll go over here, and now we can just get the message. So now this should give me the same results. Just to see that it's different, let's add a exclamation point. And that works as well. So what you're really seeing here is one of the powers of Webpack is bringing in other files, and we could have as many files as we want, and Webpack is going to pack them up for us. Now, what we'll end up taking a look at in the next step is leveraging Webpack to do different things. One of the things we'll end up doing is we'll be able to use ES6 syntax, and Webpack is going to set it up so we can use that syntax, and it's going to make it so that even if a browser doesn't know all the ES6, we can be sure that it'll end up working because it'll turn it into compatible code for those. It'll just turn it into compatible code, so it'll end up working for those browsers as well. And so that's the next thing that we'll end up doing. So a lot of the browsers support quite a bit of the ES6 features, but not all of them. So let's try to give you an example of what one of them might be. So let's do this sort of the standard way, I guess ES5. Let's say I had this function, something silly, and I'm simply going to go over here and say console.log hello. And I'll call it something silly. And I'll go over here and I'm going to reload this in Chrome. And I can see that it shows up here. And I also have Safari open, and I'll do it here. Make this a little bit bigger so you can see it, right? So I've got all this stuff printing out here. Now, one of the features of ES6 is that instead of actually having to do all this, you could turn this really into a one-liner by doing this. And I could set this up as a const with ES6. I can use var too, but again, this is something that's not changing, so I'm going to make it a const, and I'll say something silly, and I'm going to assign to it a function. So this would be for any parameters that I wanted to pass in here to the function, and I'll say console.log hello. So this now becomes a one-liner, right? Instead of function something silly, console.log hello. I'll comment this out. But these two things are, this is the ES6 version. Again, ES6 allows you to sort of not use the function keyword, and also to, if you just want to return something on one line, you could do multiple lines too. But this should work in ES6. In fact, if I go to Chrome and I run this, I'll see that this will work. But if I ended up going to Safari and I went to run this, it doesn't understand this. Okay, it actually breaks because this is not a feature that is supported in Safari. So how could I get around that? Well, now what we're going to do is we're going to get this to work by specifying that we want to transpile this code, which right now, if we ended up going back and looking over here, we would see that this is actually getting, it's basically just stitching these files together with Webpack, right? This is my output, this is in my bundle.js, and what we want to do is have something that's going to be compatible with browsers that don't support this feature. So what we're going to do here, what I'm going to do here is specify that what we want in this module, and a module has loaders. And what we're going to specify for the loaders is a loader for ES6. And I'm going to specify that I want this to work on this is going to be files that end with JS, right? This is basically a regular expression because, again, you could have multiple files that are here. Perhaps I could even leave this off, but I think I need to put it in here. And we're going to specify that the loader is going to be Babble, because Babble has the ability to do this. And also that, and again, this is a little bit of a weird syntax, but just what it is. There might be other ways to do this. We're going to query and say presets ES2015. Now, none of this is going to work, but let's just see what breaks when we end up running this. So I'm going to go back here. I'm going to kill this because I've changed my web config, and I'm going to rerun it. And it's telling me first it can't find Babble. Well, let's put in Babble. Really what we're asking for is our Babble loader. npm install Babble loader, and I'm going to save it. This comes in pretty quickly. I'm going to run this command again. And then it says, well, you forgot one other thing. You have the loader, but I don't really have Babble. So I'm going to install Babble core and save it. And that's fine, but now when I go to run it, I get an error message that I can't find this preset. So it finds Babble. It ends up finding the Babble loader and the Babble core, but it can't find ES2015. So what it's actually looking for, since it's a preset and it's Babble, it's actually looking for a module called Babble preset ES2015. So we're going to install that. Again, if you forgot what the name is, you can do a search. It'll probably come up pretty quickly. I'm going to say npm install Babble preset 2015, and I'm going to save that as well. npm install, I did that wrong, Babble preset ES 2015. ES 2015, same as ES 6. I'm going to save it. Now when I go back and I run this command that I was running before, it'll run. And actually notice when I go back here, what'll happen in my bundled file, it actually takes my something silly and look at what it does. It basically turns this into something that looks a lot more like this. So here you can sort of see what this does. And again, if you had some feature that wasn't being implemented yet by a browser like it is here in Safari, we'll see now this ends up working. So again, this shows you sort of basically how this gets set up. And before I do anything else, let's kill this. And one thing that I'll also just add here, let's say that I wanted to do this. What I could do is I could go to my package.json file. If I didn't want to type that all the time, I could go over here and say Webpack, and I could put this in. Just for practice, I'll write it out instead of copying and pasting it. Node modules, Webpack, there's a bin, webpack.js, and I'll call it with that watch flag here. This way, I've got this script here, and I could go back and say npm run webpack. It'll basically do the same thing that I was doing before. So any change that I have here, I'll go back here, I'll modify this. We could go here, and I could say hello in uppercase. And if I reloaded this, I'll see the hello in uppercase. So the next thing that I want to do is just show you, now that I have ES6, how I'm going to convert this into ES6 syntax. And we'll, again, as we go along, you don't have to know everything about ES6, but as we go along, we'll learn a couple of the features. Again, you might as well learn it now. It's something that you'll end up using. So next up, we're going to convert this code to ES6. And we'll start off with our foo. So I'm going to comment all this out. and we're going to rewrite it with ES6, which is going to be a little bit terser, look a little bit nicer. Put it here on the top. And what I'm going to do is create a class called foo. So when you're creating a class in ES6, again, this is basically going to turn into this functionality, which we're going to we're going to have the ability to have a constructor that we name constructor that we can pass something into. And since we're using ES6, one of the things we could do is we could go over here and say, I want to just pull out from this config the name. And now we could say this.name equals name. Not a huge change, but what it gives us the ability to do is that we don't have to deal with prototypes. We're going to be dealing with classes. And now we could say hi, and we'll go over here. And I'm going to go over here, and I'm just going to copy this. And we'll also want to do our get message. So just be aware, if you're writing these classes for the first time, I think it's pretty common when I was doing this. I would do something like this and like this. No commas here. Just the constructor, parentheses for arguments, and then the block of code that you're putting here. Name of the method that you want on the prototype, place for arguments, and the block for that function. And here we'll also use our ES6 syntax by going in here and switching this out to our backtick. We don't have to worry about, did we miss a plus sign or anything like that. We could go here and make it look a little bit nicer by using the $sign and say this.name. And just to make sure that this is working, we'll put a couple of these in here so we can see the change. And what we can do here, just to sort of get started, we could say module.exports, and we'll export foo the same way. And if I went back here, and even in Safari, this will run. I'll see the exclamation points. But there's a couple of other things we could do. So one of the things that you have with this is a require syntax where we do module.exports, is that you could really only export one thing. We're going to change this, and we're going to end up using the ES6 way. And let me get rid of this something silly. And I'll keep this here just so you can see it. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to specify export default. So the syntax for exporting is going to be export default, and I'm going to export by default foo. What this allows me to do is now, instead of using require, I could go here and we'll make this ES6 as well by specifying, let's comment this out, and I'm going to specify import foo from /foo. Not a huge thing, but you save a little bit of typing. I'm just importing foo, and since foo is the default that's coming back from here, I could rename this if I wanted to, but what's being exported from this file is this class. And if I run this again, this will run as well. I don't see the other stuff here because I ended up taking it out. But at this point, we've converted this from ES5 syntax to ES6 syntax. And just as an example of things that you could also, and here, if we're doing that, let's also go over here and we'll put a const here. So what's the difference between const and let? If I did this and I decided, hey, look, I really want foo to be the number 42. I could do that, but you'll see that it won't even, I can't even run this through Webpack because this is considered an error, right? It says foo is read-only. So this would work if I made this a let. So you're seeing the difference between const and let. It's also interesting to note, I'm going to change this back to const. And this is something you'll end up seeing too. This will run as well. So another example is, let's say you had an array. My array equals this array. It doesn't, what it really is saying is that I can't do this. I can't go over here and say my array is now the number 42. I'll get that same error. But what I can do is I can modify the array. So when you use const, it basically says, here's a variable. Don't blow out the variable. It's pointing to something. You can't change what it's pointing to. But I could go over here and say push 3. Right? That's a method I could put on the array, and that'll run okay. So again, a little bit at a time, the difference between const and let. Again, if you wanted to change something, like I say I equals 0, I could go over here with the let and say I plus plus. But I can't do this because then I'm changing something that's considered read-only. So a little bit at a time, you'll get the feel for how ES6 syntax works. Just one other thing that we'll put here is I'm going to put a const hello, and this is going to be a function. I told you that by default, we could go over here and just do a one-liner, and I could call hello, which should end up doing console.log of hi, which it does. If you had multiple lines here, then what you would do, instead of this being a one-liner, so by default, it'll return it if it's a one-liner. But if you wanted to do multiple lines, and probably this is not, let's actually make it a little bit more interesting. We'll say capitalize. And let's start it off on one line, and then I'll put it on a couple lines here. So if this was just one line, let's say we had some input, and we say input to uppercase. This is a one-liner, and I could say console.log capitalize foo. And this should give me foo in uppercase, which it does. But if I had multiple things that I wanted to do here, what I would have to do, once I put these braces in here, it's no longer going to automatically return it. So I'll end up getting undefined. I could get the same result by putting a return here. And why might you want to do that? Well, let's just say that we were going to say input equals input plus some exclamation points. And I wanted to return it. In that case, I need to have those multiple lines. So you need to put in the return statement, and you can see that this works as well. The only other thing that I'll just sort of throw in here is that, let's say that you wanted to export more than one thing. So we're exporting default of foo, but we could also do some what are called named exports. So I could export the variable my name, const, export const, my name equals Eric. This shouldn't end up breaking anything. This should still end up running. So the question is, how do I pull this in here? And the way that I do that is that I would go back here. So basically what I'm doing, this is what's called a named export. It's not my default export. So I created this const, and I could do this on 2 lines too. I could say const, my name is Eric, and I could export. Let's see if that works. I think you have to do, I want to export, I want to name it. Let's see if that works. I might have to put const in front of it. So I'm exporting my name, and the value is going to be my name. And let's see. I'll run that again. I think I probably still have an error here. And probably I just don't know enough about named exports, so let me go here and do what I had before. I have to read up on that. Let's see if that works. All right, so that seems to work, and what I have here is a named export, so the thing is, how do I end up bringing it in here? And what I can do in order to bring it in is that I have foo, and I could import. Notice I'm using the braces, and I could specify I want to import my name. So again, it's not the default from foo. And now if I go over here and say console.log my name, and we rerun that, I'm getting undefined. Let's try to figure out why that's the case. It's funny, I actually had to pause there for a minute. I couldn't quite figure out why this kept on coming up as undefined. And I did a bunch of different things, but then I actually went back in here and realized that even though I was exporting these things, I was pretty much overriding everything by just using my module exports. You wouldn't want to use these two things together. So once I ended up using ES6 and doing, my export instead of my module exports, I probably want to comment that out. And once I end up doing that, I should see my name will end up showing up. So this, again, is one of the advantages of using ES6 is that you could export different things. And let's just go back here, and I'm going to show you one other thing you could do. You could actually do this together on one line. So we've got our default, and we've got our named import. And just to see if this is working, I'm going to modify this, and I'll change this to prof. And you can see that works as well. So that pretty much covers what I wanted to cover using Webpack and using ES6 and converting some ES5 code into ES6, introducing you to a couple of concepts, Const, let, the string interpolation, classes. And again, you don't have to memorize all this stuff, a little bit at a time. Again, you're still learning JavaScript, and this is basically a dialect of JavaScript that people prefer to use. And that's about it.